Welcome to the Grief and Belief podcast, where we share stories of hope. Thank you for joining us. We hope this powerful story will help you feel God's love for you today.
Welcome to another episode of the Grief and Belief podcast. I'm David Mickelson.
And I'm Jordan Robertson.
And Jordan, I'm so excited to spend some time with you today. I always look forward to our visits, and you've been such a ray of hope, I think, for me and for our audience. So thank you so much for being willing to jump back on again.
Yeah, so happy to be here.
Yeah. I'm kind of hoping to tee up this episode with a little bit of a story that I think will lead into our discussion as we talk about another. We have another episode that kind of focuses on grief resources and therapy and counseling. And I just was thinking about right after our daughter passed away, people were so awesome to come and do things, drop food off, give us hugs, kind messages. But sometimes people would say, what can I do to help? And we literally were often at a loss of knowing, like, I don't know. A lot of our needs are being met. I don't know by who. I can't think straight. If you ask again, I'm going to cry in front of you, and that's embarrassing. I don't want to do that. And I remember somebody saying, because we were preparing to go plan the funeral and be at the funeral home and take care of some of those things that needed to be done. And somebody had mentioned, like, you ought to bring somebody with you who can take notes and help you think clearly while you're there, because we weren't thinking clearly. Our brains were all messed up. And so Alina's sister, Sherry, who lives up in Idaho, who had come down to just do whatever she could for us, we asked her to come and be our scribe. And it was so absolutely helpful to have somebody there who could do something that we couldn't do, but we would have never thought to ask anybody to come with us. We would have just gone down by ourselves. I'm so grateful for whoever it was that made that suggestion, like, bring somebody with you. And so I'm just thinking about, as we talk about grief resources and things, that these are the kind of things you might be able to ask someone else to do for you when you don't really know what to do. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
No, even as I was compiling these ideas, what came to me was just like, when I was grieving, it was all I could do to get out of bed and put some food in my mouth and put some food out for my kids. Like I was overwhelmed with the thought of doing much more than that. So I really feel sensitive to that. Like, as we go through, here's some things you can do. Here's some ideas. If you're like, lady, I'm barely getting out of my bed, then this may be the podcast to share with the people in your life who are asking, please let me help you. Please, what can I do?
And I like how you've prepared this presentation, because it's how grief affects adults, youth, children, and it can be so different. And so maybe I do have an idea of what I need, but I also need somebody to help my teenagers who are suffering. Or, Allie was 9 years old, my child, and this might give a close friend or a relative some ideas, ways they could be proactive when I'm not sure how to help myself, let alone help my children.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the hope. Is this is less of, it's resources for you, the griever, but it's also like resources for the team of people around you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everybody needs a team.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump into it. So we will talk through all of these as we go. But for those who are watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see the presentation. And if you're listening, you may want to go to YouTube, but we'll be able to talk through all of this pretty well. So I don't think you'll be missing out on too much if you're listening on any of the other platforms.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. So again, this is not going to be like a comprehensive list of everything out there on grief. Good news, there's a lot of stuff. So these are just some of the things I've come across for my own self, for my own family, in my research, kind of in my work as a counselor, and then just that I've found through Google searching. So not comprehensive, but it's at least maybe a starting place.
Yeah. Yep. I love that.
Yeah. So first, I want to identify kind of to attend to grief, like what do we do about it? I first want to spend just a couple minutes talking about like, what are we expecting is going on while we're grieving and while we're bereaved? And so I have kind of 3 slides broken up into what does grief look like for adults? And these are generalities, just across the board, typical for adults. This may or may not apply to you. And then what does grief look like for teens? And then what does grief look like for children? So for adults, there will be emotional, physical, cognitive, and behavioral symptoms that you experience. So some of the emotional symptoms may be shock and numbness, sadness and yearning, that longing for the deceased, anger or guilt. And then some people may experience relief because depending on the situation of their person who died, it could have been a long and prolonged experience of suffering. Physical symptoms that are common are bodily pain. So you may experience that in many different ways: in your throat, heaviness in your chest, shortness of breath, headaches, sleep disturbances. I think those are pretty common. Insomnia, excessive sleep, dreams, nightmares. Digestive issues. So that can be either eating nothing, eating everything, nausea, upset stomach, and then just a feeling of being exhausted. Cognitive symptoms, kind of what's going on mentally. Brain fog is huge. Your brain isn't functioning at 100%. So concentration, making decisions, focusing on tasks, that'll be harder. Preoccupation, so kind of that perseverating, thinking about the deceased, the experience, what could have been, what we could have done, even experiencing the person's presence. And then confusion, so questioning meaning of life, your identity, the future, just so much uncertainty. And then some behavioral symptoms that are common in adults are withdrawal. So that's pulling back from friends, family, losing interest in previously enjoyed activities. Maybe restlessness, inability to sit or relax or be still. Also crying. For some people, that might be uncontrolled bouts of crying. And for some, it might be difficulty crying at all. And then also loss of confidence. So maybe tasks or activities that once seemed manageable now just feel overwhelming. So this is just kind of like a broad overview of what grief might feel like, what might be showing up for an adult.
Would you say some of these could last kind of a long time? Like,
yes. One of the best.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the best things my mother-in-law told me, she had lost her mother about 3 years before Jake died, my husband. And I had this period of time because she knows I'm like a type A girl. I'm write my list, get all the things done, da, 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 da. And she knows that's how I run. And she came over probably within that first 6 months. And she said, George, this might take you a few years to work through. She said, and in those years, you might not get anything done. And she's like, but in your life, I was 35 at the time. She's like, 2 years in an 80-year life is very small. And that it won't be that significant. And I don't know what, but something about her framing that for me gave me permission to allow myself to say, you know what the thing I'm doing is for 2 years? I'm grieving. My husband died. I'm grieving. And so, yeah, it'll take years.
Yeah, I know. Kind of maybe a similar note. Alina has mentioned frequently, my wife Alina has mentioned frequently that when somebody who we didn't know who had lost a child came to visit us, and Alina kind of asked, like, how long did you cry for? And she said, every day for 3 years.
Mm.
And for her, that's been reassuring because that's been one of her outlets is most every day she still sheds tears over Ava. And it's been 3.5 years. but that helped her feel normal.
Yeah.
And I've appreciated that, because that's not one of the things that I've worked through some of these other things, but for me, tears, they come. Just this last weekend, they came,
Mhm.
but they don't always come. And so I think it's nice to kind of have this list to say, like, you could be experiencing any or all of it, or the opposite of it, or it
Mhm.
an extreme level. Like, all of that would be absolutely normal.
Yeah.
And everybody will do it differently and take different amounts of time for that
Mhm.
to happen. Was there anything on here that you identify with more so than maybe some of the other ones?
I mean, for me, for sure, the emotional, like the sadness and yearning was intense. And again, my husband's loss, that was the first person I loved who had died. And I had no idea the magnitude of that pain.
Mhm.
It just shocked me. Even though we knew for the years of his illness, like this is a terminal disease, it was still, I was unprepared.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the brain fog for sure is when
Mhm.
feel like I'm still experiencing that now, still trying to come out of that. And some of that withdrawal. Like, I'm a generally social person, but I have liked being in my home a lot more often, and I pull in the garage and shut the garage door. And when I find ways to get out of that, it feels really nice to go talk to the neighbors and to have some sun on my face and to do these things. I really enjoy that, but it's really hard to want to,
Yeah.
and so I know those have been some of the ones that have worked through over the years for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, none of this is exhaustive. It's just kind of an overall, some ideas of like what is going on in me. Because
Hmm.
I think that's half of the experience. It's like you lose this person, but then the experience is what is happening
Yep.
in me
Yep.
after they're gone.
Sure. Okay. Shall we go on to teens?
Mhm. Yeah, so grief in teens, and we're talking kinda like, 12 to 18, or even 13 to young adult, this could be 21, 22. There's a theory called, oh gosh, it's just escaped me. But it's basically saying now kids don't grow up until they're like 30.
Mm,
So teens could be, so keep that in mind. I think especially if you have young 20-year-olds, some of these teen symptoms, reactions may be happening in them. So teens, they're going to be similar across those levels. So emotional, physical, and behavioral changes. So emotionally, teens may have more anger or irritability. So lashing out at family members or acting defensively. Anger is a primary emotion that's often used as a cover for deeper secondary emotions like sadness or hopelessness that may be just harder for a teen to express. It's easier for anger to come out first. Anxiety and fear is a very common emotional symptom in teens and young adults. The world suddenly feels unsafe, right? They now know bad things can happen. They might worry about their safety, the safety of other loved ones, or have a fear of abandonment. Guilt. It's common for bereaved teens to feel a sense of survivor's guilt or to replay arguments, conversations, feeling maybe they're to blame or wishing they could do things over again. And then numbness. Some teens may appear just emotionally flat or detach to protect themselves from these really intense feelings. Physical symptoms, similar sleep disturbances, so either difficulty sleeping or nightmares that are frequent. Teens may also experience unexplained aches. Grief can and does often manifest physically, so that might be with headaches, stomach aches, body pain, just difficulty in their physical body that's not something that was happening before. Fatigue, similarly, teens report feeling heavy, exhaustion, lack of energy, and then changes in appetite. So increase or decrease, and then that can lead to noticeable weight changes, or things to kind of watch or be aware of in teens who are grieving. Behavioral changes are similar to adults. Social withdrawal. A teen might isolate themselves from friends, stop participating in activities or sports that they previously enjoyed. Teens are in school, and so this may show up in academics. Grief can impact their ability to concentrate. They might have a drop in grades or a lack of motivation to complete schoolwork or even go to school. Risk taking. So some may act out by reckless behavior, such as skipping school, acting violently, experimenting with drugs and alcohol to escape the emotional pain. And then peer reliance. Sometimes teens may really lean heavily into their friends rather than adults, which can sometimes lead to them feeling misunderstood in their grief. So again, these are just broad categories, but possible kind of reactions that teens might have who are grieving.
Having teens at the time when our daughter passed away, she was 18 years old and was the oldest. So everybody kind of fit into that. So many of these I've noticed, like the academic struggle was motivation for sure, but also like, is this even worth it? Why am I even doing this? What does this even matter? That was what we heard a lot with our kids. Like, you really want me to read this book that has nothing to do with anything, and
Yeah.
I just want to cry because my sister's dead,
Yeah.
and trying to pull them out of that, of your future still matters. And, it was hard because a lot of times we were like, you know what, we agree. This assignment doesn't matter.
Totally. And a death compared to a stupid high school assignment is like, these aren't even on the same plane,
Yep. Yeah. And then in that emotional side, we definitely saw each one of our kids react differently. We had one that was kind of the anger was a big part of their experience, and then one that was numb.
Yeah.
And so just interesting how it can be different within the same household. Each kid is unique, has their own personality and the way that they grieve. And
Yes.
we could have never guessed. We could have never known how that was going, how they were going to respond to it. And
because just like you, the adult, you don't know until you're in it. Yeah. So I think, again, it's just helpful to be aware of kind of the broad possibilities. I will put in a caveat too for young children, and I'm talking young, more the ages of my kids when my husband died, 10 and under. Often someone told me this was the best advice. She had a woman who was widowed I talked to shortly after my husband died, and she said, Jordan, be prepared for your kids to grieve again when they're teenagers, and I was like, what? She said, my son was 4 when his dad died. And when he was 16, the wheels came off. It was like, who is this kid and what's happening? And she's like, I didn't put it together for a long time because it was 12 years later. So I would put that out, that if you have young children, be aware and stay aware of these symptoms. And so far, my 2 oldest girls, as they've hit 15, 16, 17, and their emotional ability, their cognitive abilities are expanding, grief has come up strong and clear for each of them.
Yeah. And it's hard, especially when it's delayed, that whatever they seem to be frustrated, sad with is often something else, but deep down inside they're grieving the loss. So I remember I have a friend who does a really great podcast. His name's Stephen Jones, and he does one with Scripture Central. And he would often tell me, he's like, the thing is not the thing. And just in that, it's like, doesn't make any sense. But then, we'd have a kid crying over something that was not that important. And then all of a sudden they'd say, I miss Ava. It's like that, those two things, nothing here makes sense, but to them, everything's bigger because they are still grieving the loss of their sister. And so it was helpful for me to kind of always like keep in my mind when I'm seeing a behavioral, emotional, some sort of challenge, could grief be impacting this? And the answer is probably yes, to some extent.
Yeah, no, I think it's safe, and it helps you as parent kind of to hold that in the back of your mind rather than reacting to these things. I think I've gone too far the other way, being like, oh, it's because you're sad about dad. Oh, this is, and my girls are like, no, it's not. So
It's not always about that. Yeah.
Is a line, but I think kind of holding that in your mind and your heart that like, this may happen and it may be very delayed where I'm not even connecting the dots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about grief in children.
Yeah. So grief in children, and it kind of depends on the ages of children, right? So kind of 0 to 5, infant, toddler, and then school age children, 6 to 12. So infants and toddlers may experience a developmental regression. So kind of reverting to earlier behaviors such as bedwetting, thumb sucking, or using baby talk. They may develop separation anxiety. So get extremely clingy or be really scared when they're left alone. Similarly, young children can have sleep issues, nightmares, fear of the dark, changes in their sleep patterns, and they may be just generally more irritable, frequent uncharacteristic crying, or general moodiness. School-age children may report more physical complaints, so stomach aches, headaches, fatigue, dizziness, just not feeling well. And again, because those emotional feelings kind of manifest most easily physically. Academic difficulties also for little kids, so lack of focus, difficulty with assignments, drop in grades. And then some children in this age may experience what's called magical thinking. So it's feeling guilty or believing their actions, thoughts, or words caused the death. And that's a thing to just be aware of and to speak to directly, letting children know that in no way could what they have done or said or thought caused anyone else to die. And then social changes. So that's similar withdrawal from peers or activities that they previously enjoyed.
Yeah, it feels like I just remember my kids being, before Ava passed away, just being a parent and having kids with sickness when they're 0 to 5 and they can't say their stomach hurts or that their throat hurts and all they're doing is crying, and you're like grasping at straws to figure out what's making you feel uncomfortable or unhealthy.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine the complexity of adding a death of a loved one into it, and for them to even have the capacity to explain any of it. That would be so frustrating. So I can imagine all of these things would make sense because they've got all these big feelings and no real way to get them out except for to be irritable, to be, whatever it might be.
Behavioral in children will be the manifestation.
Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, there's much more information on this depending on the age of your child. Yeah. So then just a couple slides like on trauma and what happens to our brains when we have experienced trauma. And this is trauma, I think, not just people walk around way too much saying, oh, I've been traumatized. We're not talking about that. But losing a loved one, seeing someone decline, witnessing death, those are actually traumatic experiences. So our prefrontal cortex is just the front of our brain. That's our higher level thinking, our rational thinking. And it helps us regulate our emotions and our responses to fear. But with PTSD or when we experience trauma, our prefrontal cortex isn't working as well. It reduces in volume. Our hippocampus is responsible, and this is a part kind of deeper in the middle of our brain. It's responsible for our memory and differentiating between the past and the present. It works to remember and make sense of trauma, but with consistent exposure to trauma, the hippocampus can shrink. And then the amygdala, which is this tiny organ in the brain, kind of like right in the midline, is what is wired to help us survive. When it's active, it's hard for our rational brain, our prefrontal cortex, to become online. And so the more hyperactive the amygdala is, the more signs of PTSD are present. And I think this is especially applicable for people who have had, like you, David, just sudden death, right? Where it comes out of the blue. I have a very dear widowed friend whose husband went on a hiking kind of rappelling trip and fell and died. Like just when those things happen and you have no preparation. Again, our situation was different in that my husband had a disease. It came out of the blue. It was like we were hit by a truck when he was diagnosed, but then we had time, we had years to kind of work our minds and hearts around it.
So is this where, like, and maybe we'll talk about some of these things in the next slides, but I'm just thinking, like, there's probably some things I might be able to do to activate different parts of my brain if I was really intentional about. I'm thinking of like breathing exercises, or I don't know what it might be, but
yeah, there are things. And so I think the main idea is just like becoming aware of like, oh, different parts of my brain are highly operational or are not functioning to their normal levels when I have had someone die. And if I've had someone die suddenly or traumatically, like if you witnessed an accidental death and were there as it's happening, like your brain will be affected by that. And that amygdala, those emotional responses will fire probably more strongly than maybe your rational thinking brain or even your hippocampus that's storing your memory.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah. So then this next slide just kind of talks about our two this is our nervous system. So our brain and our spinal cord, are part of our nervous system. And we have two main nervous systems, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. The parasympathetic is what we're wired for in our nerves to help us rest and digest. So it's what helps our brain calm down. It decreases alertness. It helps us breathe slower, deeper. It calms our heart rate. It stimulates digestion, like, okay, let's get this food moved through. And it kind of relaxes our muscle tone. When we're in sympathetic nervous system, so fight or flight, like things are on edge, we have increased alertness, pupils dilated, we are breathing faster, our heart's beating at more accelerated pace, our digestion's inhibited, and our muscle tone is increased. And so you can imagine like I had these different types. I mean, you can imagine if you live too long in one or the other, right? The ideal is that we move back and forth. Our parasympathetic is where we spend most of our time, but then our sympathetic is there and rouses us to do the things we need to do and to act. But when someone dies or is having an illness, I think every time my husband went in for surgery, I'm like, oh yeah, I was living in my sympathetic nervous system for days, not just 20 minutes, like every cough, every beeper that would go off every sec, And so I think when our nervous system gets out of balance and we don't have time, I didn't eat during those years. Like I just wasn't interested. And I'm like, no wonder, because my digestive system probably wasn't working.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway.
Yeah, I like that you said oscillate, because when I saw this slide, I went back to episode 1 on grief frameworks, and I was like, oh, I get it. If you're stuck in one or the other, that's not healthy. It's not just emotionally challenging, it's physically challenging as well, and must just wear you down so much, which is why I'm sure exhaustion is such a big part of grief.
Yeah. So I think understanding that, like what's happening in our brain and then just what's happening in our physical bodies, like this stuff, we are the stage in which it's playing out.
Yep. Okay, so I think our next slide, we're starting to talk about now resources, and I started to get ahead of myself because that's just what I do. But
yeah,
I think this is great.
Go ahead. So again, these resources, not exhaustive, right? Like these are just some ideas so I kind of collated this from my own life, talking to people in counseling, talking to friends and family members who've been grieving, of just what has helped you. So I hope that this is kind of a starting point, and this may be a place, where friends, family members, interested parties who are trying to offer support can kind of take note and dig deeper. So I think we already talked about counseling and psychotherapy. We have a whole podcast episode about that. So I just invite you to go back and review kind of everything related to pursuing counseling. I don't think we need to say more on that unless, David, you
No. Yep.
have anything else.
We're good.
Okay. Pursuing practices for mindfulness and meditation. So mindfulness it's in vogue. It's a huge wave even in counseling. But what mindfulness does is it's an active effort to move us back to parasympathetic functioning. So it is a practice in which you learn how to move your nervous system from being activated into that kind of rest and relax. So there are different ways to pursue mindfulness or meditation. Many yoga studios have practices, but there's a lot of stuff online. So there's apps. Some that I like are Calm, Insight Timer, or Headspace. And all of these have kind of guided practices that you can start with. And 5 minutes a day is a really good start. Another resource for adult is just pursuing self-care. Again, I know self-care gets a bad name because lots of people do self-indulgence in the name of self-care. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about here is identifying really small things that help you kind of refill your reservoir. And there's a man, Kent Allen, who's a social worker, who talked about this years ago at a grief conference I went to. But his best suggestion is that you make yourself a 5-minute list and a 1-hour list. So what I did is on my phone, just in my notes app, I had a 5-minute list where I wrote things that within a 5-minute time period I could do that would just give me a little lift. One was like listen to a song, give my child a hug, go outside and breathe in fresh air. And then the other idea is to make an hour list. So things you can do within a 1-hour period that help you renew, that help you distract. So for me, that was like watch a TV show, have a phone call with someone, give myself an hour to read a book, take a bath. So I think that self-care is just identifying and being really, really actually specific about like, what are the things for me that give me a chance either to find relief, to distract, or to just take care of myself.
I like the list. I like the list idea because I do think sometimes we have the time, but we don't have an idea. And so we scroll or
100%.
or don't do anything, And so it's kind of like, well, if I had a list, I probably could jump into it.
Because it's like if you're going to click on your app to scroll, you can click in your notes to go to your list.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah. Support groups, there are many kinds. So there's a lot of online support groups. Heal Grief, the Compassionate Friends, Grief Share. There's a National Widowers organization, and then there's the Sisterhood of Widows. Oh, and I have an and there. I don't know why that's there. But there's support groups, and there's support groups really specific to certain types of loss. So if you're like, I've lost a child, I've lost my husband of 30 years, I've lost my wife of 2 years, there's even niche groups for those kinds of losses. And then in person, and these are particularly for people who live kind of in the Intermountain West, but I think also there will be in-person grief support for wherever you live. But there's Intermountain Health provides grief groups, the Sharing Place, and then Caring Connections. So those are just some options.
And you've done some work with the Sharing Place? I'm trying to remember.
I've donated some books to them, and my kids went to a couple of groups there, but my work was with hospice and Intermountain Health.
Okay.
And we had a grief group that we would run kind of every year on the school year.
Yep. Okay.
Yep. Adults, move your bodies. So exercise can be a really important way to help you process, and kind of, again, the brain and the nervous system help some of those feelings and emotions work themselves out. Just spending time outdoors. So even if you're not exercising, I remember my brother-in-law and my mom saying, George, I've always been a runner, like, you should get out and run. And it was like, I cannot. But then and I appreciated their encouragement. But then I had my ministering sisters just said, hey, what if we just walked down the street? And so that's what we did. We went outside, we walked down the street, we walked back. And that over time went into like, let's walk the whole block. Let's walk up to this trail. Let's walk to the end of the trail. Let's walk, and it really has become kind of a wonderful friendship and relationship just through moving together, because then it was a place where I could start to unload and talk about some of those things.
I think that is a really good one, that not an easy one for friends to do or family, but easy to offer, easy to suggest, because let's just get out of the house and walk around the cul-de-sac, walk around the block. I'm thinking of our interview with Troy and Deidre Russell, and his home teacher would come to his house in the morning. I'm picking you up for basketball. We're going to go do basketball. And that kind of saved his life in a lot of ways. And so that exercise, even if it's small, can be such a big deal.
Yeah. Huge. Bibliotherapy. So this is basically pursuing literature, finding books that help you understand either more about grief. So reading books about what happens to people who are grieving, what happens to you when your husband dies, when your child dies. There's also books about fiction, about what loss could be like, or what different people have gone through. But I think for some people, really being able to dive in and read, like, what is this like? What's going on? What do people who've had this experience go through, is a way to help process some of that out. Similarly, podcasts. So I think that's now a way in our modern world where we get a lot of information and where we can kind of be exposed to different people's experiences. So big plug, Grief and Belief podcast. There's also one called The Widowed Mom, Thanks for Asking, Grief Out Loud, Life After Child Loss. And then there's like the most famous kind of big name one is All There Is with Anderson Cooper, where he just interviews famous people who have experienced loss. So I think podcasts are a nice way to hear, to feel, to be, but you can do it, while you're laying on your bed because you can't get up to that day.
Yeah, I've listened to a handful of episodes of All There Is with Anderson Cooper, and often find them really mentally stimulating, because they're not people of our faith. They might be people of faith or might not be. And so they're just viewing it in a different way that often is really wonderful, that I may not have thought of. And so, and they're interesting because they're people many of them are people you probably know. So that's a little bit interesting to learn about it from that perspective. But one of our guests, Mary Colton, is the one who, she was one of our early on interviews, and she was the one who sent me a link to say, have you listened to this yet? And I really enjoyed it. I still, every now and again, if there's somebody that I'm really interested in hearing about, I'll still listen to one of those every now and again.
Yeah. And I think podcasts are a way too for the periphery people who are trying to be helpful. I think my mom and my mother-in-law have not lost spouses. And yet here I am, having lost my spouse. So I know it's been helpful for them to kind of listen to podcasts about widowhood, and especially about young widows, to just get a bigger sense of like, what is this like? What is Jordan feeling? What could it be? And again, it's not representative of my experience specifically, but it's just a way to kind of get yourself in the shoes of the person you're trying to support.
And again, a very easy text a link to a friend, or, and that's kind of our hope with this podcast. It becomes really easy to say, I listened to this, reminded me of you. I thought you would like to listen to it, and send somebody a text message,
Yeah. No, so helpful. And then last, I just have conferences. So going to places where you can be with other people who've experienced loss and learn together. So BYU again has the Life After Loss conference every March. And then there's an organization called Good Grief that has many and multiple events throughout the United States. So depending on where you live or what's easiest for you to access, there are different places you can go.
One of the things I liked about this one, I'm not, I read a lot of things, but I was not interested in reading about grief or grief therapy. I read about some of the spiritual aspects of losing a loved one and spirit world and some of those things. But I went to Education Week at BYU, and they had a grief therapist, Marie Ricks, present, and I went to hers. I loved it so much. It was awesome. And it was just very educational. And I didn't even know what I was signing up for, but it just, so many things made sense when I listened to somebody who had experience in education explain something. It was really helpful to me. I remember coming back from that, just feeling like, I think I can do this. Like, I feel like people understand more about this than what I do at this point. And if I can educate myself and grow, I think I might be able to survive this.
Yeah.
So it was really hopeful to me.
That's lovely. And that speaks to like what we need in grief, because grief is isolating. It's so isolating. You're having this experience. It feels like you're the only one, and you're the only one you're the only dad who's lost Ava, right? I'm the only wife who lost Jake, but then you learn and you put yourself in these places with other people, and then suddenly it becomes universal. Like, oh, loss happens to all kinds of people. There's all kinds of people going through this. These feelings, these reactions, these whatever I'm having, millions of people are having them too. And something about the universal nature of it just makes you feel not so alone.
Yeah. Well, let's keep talking. Let's talk about teens.
Yeah. So some resources for teens. Again, we'll get to kids, and that's my specialty, but there's several good things. There's an Instagram handle. She's my very favorite lady. I followed her for about 7 years, a long time. Her handle is called Teen Life Grief Notes, and it's just grief specific activities, books, questions, things that teens can do. The Doogie Center is out of Oregon. They are wonderful. And they have on their website, you can go to grief support and resources. And then they have a specific section for teens. And again, that will just direct you to a whole bunch of information to help teens who are grieving. There's an online grief support group called Talk Grief for teens and young adults specifically. The Sharing Place. Oh, yeah.
No, I keep going.
Yeah, the Sharing Place is in Utah. And so they have 4 locations kind of all throughout the state, and they provide teen and family group therapy. Camp Kesem is a camp for teens up to age 18 who've had a parent with cancer. So that's specific. The parent doesn't have to have died, but they did have cancer. And then another flip side to that for young adults is you can work at Camp Kesem. So I think that can be a way for teens to kind of integrate, give back, make meaning. There are also things called experience camps, and that's what you Google, experience camps. And they're for teens who've lost a loved one, and that's more broad. So it could be a parent, a sibling, and there's multiple locations of those throughout the US. There's an organization called the Inheritance of Hope, and it's for children who have a parent with a terminal cancer. And then again, literature. So teens just being exposed to, and the best for teens is fiction literature. I can't tell you how many books are about death. because death is interesting, death is compelling, death is emotional. And I think even teens reading fiction about other people who've had grief experiences can help. So I have a couple things on here of just how you can find books for teens. There's Heal Grief, Illuna, and then I put an actual link to, it's the New York Public Library has a reading list for teens to help them cope with grief. And so I think books too is a way that family members, can help, like read reviews, order, kind of filter through. Is this a book that would be applicable, that would be appropriate, that someone would be interested in, right? And there's Audible where kids can listen to things if that helps. But that's a way I think people on the outside who want to be helpful can.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's talk about your specialty.
Yeah. So resources for children. So my dissertation work was specifically on talking to grandparents, but it was talking to grandparents who were supporting bereaved grandchildren. So we were looking at, they had to have a grandchild age 12 or younger who had lost either their sibling or one of their parents. And all of our work was on what do these grandparents do to try and offer help and support for kids. And so my work specifically focused on what I'll talk about at the end, but I want to go through just some really good resources for children. So the Sesame Workshop is a website that's put out by Sesame Street, and they provide resources on tons of different topics, but they have one specifically under their family resources for grief. And that thing is wonderful. I actually attended a whole 2-hour conference on them talking through their website, but it has wonderful content, videos, clips, things that are quite approachable for especially young children. There's the Instagram account that I love. The lady not only has a teen account, she has a child account, and it's called Child Life Grief Notes. And it is excellent. Again, providing activities, hands-on. And this is a place where grandparents or aunts or uncles are like, I'm going to spend the weekend with these kids who've lost their parent or their sibling. I want to do something with them. Man, go to that site, look up some things, have an activity prepared. The Doogie Center also provides resources for children. So that's on their website. There's a section that says for kids. There's what's called the National Alliance for Children's Grief. So this is, again, specifically an organization focused around the grief of children. Learning Grief is a website that you can get more information for children's grief. The Inheritance of Hope, that's for children who have a parent with terminal cancer. The Loss Foundation, theirs is cool because they provide child grief worksheets. And so these are especially appropriate and helpful, maybe right after the death or leading up to the funeral, or in the days where you're moving or sorting through the belongings and you're trying to get a feel for where is the child. The worksheets speak specifically to give you specific ideas of questions, or let the child express kind of what's going on and how they're feeling. The Sharing Place I already talked about, but it is for children and provides family and grief counseling, group counseling, and then Camp Kesem. So kids can actually go to this from age 6 and older. So these are all helpful. And then my specialty is picture books for children. So kind of as background, when I decided to go back for a PhD, I was like, I need to get some research experience. I've been out of touch with things for a while. And so I went in with this woman named Melissa Heath, and she, all her research at BYU was on children's literature. And I went in to meet with her, and she said, Jordan, I have never had anyone, we've gone through picture books on all different topics, but I've never had anyone go through the ones about death. And I said, oh, Melissa, sign me up. So she owned probably 100 picture books on death. And then we, through our kind of researching, bought almost 100 more. And each of these I brought to my home. I had all over. I read every single one because I had to do kind of a coding sheet where I put who died, how old was the child, what was the circumstance, whatever. But it was such a cool experience because those books were just in my house. And so guess who read them? All my little kids.
Mhm.
And at this time, my kids were a little older. My oldest was maybe 14, 12, 10. But they were just there, and they're picture books, so they're approachable. Kids pick them up. The illustrations are really lovely, and they just gave us access to read about experiences of other kids who'd gone through similar things. And then my kids could ask questions. They could say, "Oh, that's nice," and go off and play. Some of them in the back had activities, and sometimes we would do one of those. So I want to share this resource, which is my very best one, that I have all of these books available. And you can find the list where the title and the author are listed. So they're listed by category, and I'll just give everybody the website, but it's also here on the video if you watch the video version. But
And
the
we'll link to it in our episode notes as
perfect.
well. Yep.
That'd be even better. So it's bit.ly/kid grief books. So if you go to that site, I just went to it today to make sure, is this thing working? But it is. If you go to that site, you'll find a huge sheet. And basically what it has is 200 plus books for children on grief. And they're categorized kind of by theme. So some are just about death generally. Some are about death workbooks. So they're specific workbooks or activity books for someone who's died. And then we have them by the main character dying. So there's grandfathers who died, grandmothers, mothers, fathers, siblings, pets. That has the most. There's the most books for kids about pet death, which makes sense because that's the most common death that a child will experience. And then there's a category of kind of other, because there's books about a lot of different kinds of things: an uncle, a best friend, an elderly neighbor, a teacher. And so we just have them categorized that way so that you can kind of find access to whichever book or genre of books that fits your family or your situation.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's such a great resource. And I remember you talking about this project, and then you saying, "David, do you know what was missing?"
Yeah. So
And
since we always end on this podcast talking about Jesus, I was like, I'm going to just share. So the thing that stood out to me after I read 200 books for kids on death is there wasn't a book that talked about how Jesus understands what you're going through when someone dies and how he can help. There wasn't one. And so I knew that in my mind. And then a cool experience happened that I write in my journal every night before I go to bed. And I was writing my journal, and I just had come to my mind the first 2 lines of this book. And it was, when your daddy died, you felt sad. Jesus felt sad too. When your daddy died, you cried. Jesus cried too. And from that really did spring this little children's book that became more general. So now the book speaks to any death. It says, when someone I love died, I felt sad. Jesus felt sad too. And then there's a verse of scripture on the page talking about Jesus that references where and how he had that feeling. And so this book is just kind of like it. I really feel like it came from Heavenly Father, and it's a resource for people who really want their children to know the person you turn to in your grief is the Savior. This is a picture. The picture on the slide is of my little kids. These are the ages they were when Jake died. So these pictures were taken like a month after his death. So I had 10, 8, 6, and 2. And while this book wasn't published until 3 years ago, and they weren't those ages, I just feel really strongly, and I'm so grateful that it exists for kids who are those ages. And I think for the adults who are reading it to them. I think all of us overall, and especially within our faith, know that Jesus is the source. He's the only source we can turn to help us in our times of bereavement.
Having, the way I got introduced to you was by somebody giving me your book. And I remember reading through it and just thinking, this is so beautifully simple. It's just matter of fact and so connecting to Jesus Christ. And what a blessing to be able to have children who have that childlike faith in him, be able to maybe deepen their understanding of how he connects with us and why he can connect with us. And it really is so simple, but so well done. I think anybody with, again, we talked about this before. We're not here to sell a bunch of
Not
books, right?
publicizing. No,
Yep.
no.
But
This is not a moneymaker. Don't worry.
yep. But I just think like people who are listening to this podcast are interested in Jesus and have children who, or know of families with children who need to connect with him. And so I just think it's such a great resource. We'll link to this as well, like we did in your personal podcast that we did, and make sure that this is easily found by our listeners.
Thanks, David. Yeah, so that's all for this presentation. We can go off the slides, but I just think overall my feeling would just be that there are many, many resources for people who grieve. I think that is God's gift to the bereaved, knowing, you can't read, we're in the Old Testament this year, and you can't read about the widows and fatherless, but it's speaking to just this category of people who are carrying heavy burdens. And even if you're not widowed or fatherless, whatever your grief and your loss is, it's heavy, but it's known to God. And we live in a time where there's just a proliferation of available resources. So I hope that there are some of these that maybe you can turn to, you can have family members turn to that can provide help, because I think they're sent from Heavenly Father for that purpose.
Well, Jordan, thank you so much for being so well prepared to share and to educate and to speak passionately about these things. You've been, I think I've said before, a shining ray of hope. And so thank you for all you do to share all of this content with our listeners. We'll link out to everything like we've talked about in episode notes, and just think that this could really be beneficial to everybody who's listening. We hope you'll get an idea and act on it, and that will make a difference in your grieving experience.
Thank you.
Thank you to our incredible guests for sharing their story of hope. If you know someone who might be blessed by hearing this message, please share it with them. We would love it if you would subscribe, rate, and review, and comment on our podcast so others can find it. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook, as well as join our Grief and Beliefs Facebook group. Thank you to our sponsor, High Five Live Tours, where fun and joy meet on inspiring travel experiences. Special thanks to our producer, Misty Lynn Howard. Check out her history podcast called Faith Ignited. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time.